So the objective of today is really to talk about net zero and how that affects healthcare. And I saw some really interesting stats, gentlemen, about the healthcare industry and greenhouse gas emissions. And it turns out that the healthcare industry, when combined and comparing the healthcare industry to the rest of the world, the healthcare industry would in fact be the fifth largest country when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. So we're talking about a slightly, I would say, inflated problem, if that's the word we want to use. Christopher, why is the healthcare industry so heavy on greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, many reasons. The obvious one that springs to mind, it generates an enormous amount of waste, a lot of one-time use packaging for medical products, um, syringes, which get incinerated, the massive contributor greenhouse gases, and the huge amount of energy that's used in its supply chain for bringing, manufacturing medical supplies, transporting them. Um, and then the energy used in the hospitals themselves. Lights are on all of the time. There's enormous amounts of medical equipment being used, which consumes energy. And of course, something Highbox might be able to help with: screens.
100%. And before we get into the screens, one really interesting observation when it comes to just the goal of trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is the fact that you are kind of bound with the investments that you made years and years ago. So the really only way you can, in a meaningful way, contribute to reducing your emissions is by looking at things like procurement and sourcing, isn't it, Christopher?
Yes, it certainly is. And healthcare organizations are usually very big and unwieldy and don't change their suppliers very easily or quickly. So there's a lot of inertia built up in the supply chains, and also inertia in legacy equipment, and so
Yeah,
you end up,
no, and I agree. And Matthias, speaking of that, Highbox has positioned itself as not just a provider of interesting healthcare patient information systems, but we're also leaning into helping organizations reduce their emissions. But how do we do that?
Thanks, Rasmus. Well, it's not a matter of only doing this because our customers would like us to. We will, of course, would like to carry the responsibility for our part of the environmental emissions that our industry produces as well. In our little corner of the palette that Christopher described a moment ago, we do our best to save energy on displays for financial reasons, but of course also to reduce the emissions. We strive to control most of the displays that a hospital uses. And by centralizing many different kinds of displays into the same system, we can ensure that they work together, have reasonable climate and eco settings, and then also to provide consultation for procurement to buy devices that actually support this initiative by making by choosing displays that work best in each situation.
So talk me through some of the very practical ways in which by designing a patient experience, if you will, on how you can, by just making clever choices, how you can reduce, for example, the energy consumption
Indeed.
of individual displays.
Well, the two examples that come to mind first, from a patient experience perspective, for example, in a patient bed, you may have a TV that is outside the medically certifiable area. It needs to be, if it's not a medically certified TV, it needs to hang on a wall somewhere quite distant from the bed. That could be 4 or 5 meters away. Yeah. And if the patient is that distant from the screen, they're going to see a rather small image. But you have an even more immersive experience as a patient with a bedside display that is only 0.5 meter from your bed, or 2 feet from the patient. That gives a larger display area from the perception of the patient with a much smaller energy consumption. Similarly, in public areas, earlier, I think 5-10 years ago, still the hype and the trend was to have as bright displays as possible for impactful digital signage. Well, nowadays we could turn that, reduce the amount of lighting in public areas, in buildings, which also gives us a chance to reduce the power consumption, the brightness of displays. And by simply adjusting the brightness of displays down to something that is very visible, but not too bright, we can save 50% of power consumption with regular displays.
Is that something, Christopher, when you deal with healthcare providers on a daily basis, is that something they think about, looking at how design and designing that experience of patients and staff alike is something that they can use to improve their goal towards getting to net zero?
I think the challenge is finding the time to think about it, Rasmus. But if they have the time to think about it, then yes. That's why we'd like to raise awareness of the issue a little bit more, so that people in the healthcare systems are not so, just running fast just to stay still. But so yeah, I think that they've been given they've been given targets by governments and by regulators to cut their emissions and to meet net zero targets, and they're looking for solutions on how they can meet their targets. Their challenge is finding the time to actually research those solutions.
I think that's the part of the challenge as well, knowing what to invest in. And previously we talked about procurement and sourcing being one of the major contributors to actually reaching those net zero goals. But Matthias, what innovations are on the horizon for healthcare providers that would help them do that?
One innovation in itself that I mentioned is basically just centralizing the management of many displays into a single system. That is something that organizations give us great feedback for, the capability of not having multiple vendors, multiple servers in server racks, also drawing power, but centralizing even multiple locations, even an entire trust. All their hospitals and wards can use a single solution, which makes it possible not only to very efficiently manage the content of those displays, but also to control their power consumption. We also see a quite strong trend among display manufacturers now to indeed take ecological ambitions in consideration when they're manufacturing and designing new displays. So there are ranges of displays that are designed to reduce the power consumption, as I mentioned, for example, by just simply reducing the brightness and having sensible default values for those, but also completely new technology like e-paper displays that virtually consume no power while on, and can maintain images on the display without consuming any power, only consume power when they update their content. Things like that are definitely emerging in this industry as well.
The challenge, of course, with healthcare and public sector in general is that the investments tend to be rather long term. So whatever technology is available now, and if you lock on to selecting a specific piece of technology, you're going to be stuck with that particular set for a number of years. So how do, Christopher, healthcare providers, especially in the UK, make decisions on what to invest in, apart from obviously cost? What are the other criteria they're looking for?
I think they're looking for support. That's the other big criterion, is a company that can stay with them, that they can call upon to not just to solve problems that occur, but to keep their system fit for purpose, so it doesn't become outdated and not usable, and a great example, there used to be a pay TV system in the UK, and and it was very unpopular and became unfit for purpose. And what they don't want is to be stuck with systems like that, that they can't get rid of.
So how do you make decisions then, Matthias? What are the steps towards making that decision that you feel someone in procurement or sourcing would need to be aware of?
I feel that clever requirements in the procurement is key to make sure they buy systems that are built to last from providers that will stick around for the long term, and well, it's hard not to describe our own solutions in this case, but one of the examples, for example, that frequently comes to mind is that we commit to update our solutions every year, at least once every year, to make sure that we are compatible. The system is compatible with upcoming devices, new integrations, and even new features that comes along will be made available. So even though display devices that were purchased some number of years ago may become obsolete over time, the system itself should remain operational and state of the art at all times.
Yeah.
That's
so something
clever.
I can
evergreen at its best.
Can I add something,
Sorry,
Rasmus,
Christian, go on.
about what UK
Absolutely.
providers are looking for? The other thing that's really important, I said support, and it's sort of linked to that. It's a local presence, and they want some company, some people who are able to come physically to their premises, look at the screens that have been installed, check that everything's as it should be, and they call it walking the floor, and I think that's something that's really important. And that's why Hibox has selected its local partner that can do that kind of thing. What they don't want is some, remote remote thing so that they have to speak to a call center in India or somebody in the USA. That's absolutely what they don't want.
That sounds quite understandable. So, gentlemen, I think that's where we want to leave it at now. Thank you so much for joining. We'll continue the conversation around net zero in future videos. Thank you so much.
Thank you.